This is gonna take crackerjack timing, Wang.
Total concentration. You ready, Jack?
I was born ready.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and it feels like it's been forever since I've actually done a comic book review on the channel, but we're here, we're back. You know, obviously comic books have been funneling out for a few weeks now, but the first real big hit of the post-COVID shutdown is here. Dark Knight's Death Metal #1 from the powerhouse duo of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. This is a follow-up to their huge mega hit, Dark Knight's Metal. Me personally, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Dark Knight's Metal event. While I did like the tie-ins a lot, I liked the origin stories for the Red Death, Dawnbreaker. I didn't actually like the story all that much. I felt like it was a little bit too dark, not very hopeful, and not really my cup of tea. I thought DC Comics was in a great place kind of before that with Rebirth, but Dark Knight's Metal obviously took it in a different direction. So, but leading up to Dark Knight's Death Metal, we've been leading up to this for a long time, well over a year. We've had Year of the Villain, Scott Snyder's Justice League. We've had Batman Superman by Joshua Williamson, Hell Arisen by James Tynion. Before all this happened, like well over half of my pull list were all DC Comics. That has been dwindling over time due to the very dark direction of DC Comics since Dark Knight's Metal. So I am looking forward to this because I really hope this is going to be the end of an era. This is going to be the finish line. I hope when this is all over, the Source Wall is finished and the dark multiverse is gone forever. I just hope we never come back to this. I hope this is the end of an era. Some general thoughts on Dark Knight's Death Metal before I get into some of the specifics of the story. This is called Anti-Crisis Part 1. I don't know how in the hell this can be considered an anti-crisis. The Batman Who Laughs basically controls Earth. Perpetua is out destroying multiverses. Obviously, we'll get into some of those details. This is all likely leading to a reset of the entire DCU. How is this not a crisis? This is a crisis whether DC Comics wants to admit it or not. This is a crisis event leading to a reset of the universe. Some good things about it. It's very bombastic. It does have a dark tone, but it's really fun. Scott Snyder adds some levity to it to kind of break up the hopeless feeling of the book. Specifically, I think Sergeant Rock, who's at the very beginning and the end, I thought was great. Also, there was some jokes taken at Dino Batman's expense, which I didn't really like. I thought that might be one of the cooler characters in the story, but basically he's just there as a punchline for Diana to make jokes at. One thing I don't like, generally speaking, about this comic book, there is a ton of dialogue in Dark Knight's Death Metal, like a lot of dialogue. It's not quite Bendis-esque as far as the tone of it, but the amount of it felt a little bit like Bendis. And I've hated this since that character, the Batman Who Laughs, has been introduced. I loathe red font on black background, especially with the Batman Who Laughs because of the scribble font. But just bottom line up front about this comic book, it's beautifully illustrated. It's a fun issue that I do believe is bogged down by a convoluted story, which we'll obviously get into. I do recommend it. This event will be consuming DC Comics through the end of 2020. But if you're looking for a well thought out, easily consumable story, you might steer clear of Dark Knight's Death Metal because it feels like it's going to be a convoluted mess. So let's get into the art by Greg Capullo. Classic Capullo. It's gorgeous, very gothic, all the great details and everything that you want to see from Greg Capullo art. FCO Placencia is his colorist. They've worked together a lot. It's like peanut butter and jelly. Obviously that works here. He definitely chews up the scenery with a ton of weird versions of Batman. You've got, Dino Batman. We've got a dark side Batman. There's a mage Batman in there. There's versions of Robin that are flying over the city, as like dragons or something. There's a lot of really weird stuff that certainly plays into Capullo's strengths as a creator, and he definitely is utilized to his best here as far as some of the creations he got to do. The setting itself is very reminiscent of the last thing that Snyder and Capullo worked on, which was Last Night on Earth. It also has kind of the same tone as far as the story, where Last Night on Earth was kind of kicked off by the world turned away from hope and just fell apart on itself. That's kind of how we got here to Dark Knight's Death Metal, was the world turned away from hope and all the heroes lost. I'm starting to think this might have to be symbolic of a recent election cycle, but maybe I'm wrong on that one. But it feels like a something that Snyder keeps talking about or playing into in his stories. There is so much going on in this comic book, though, that Capullo doesn't really get enough opportunities to really stand out with really cool images or iconography that really make an impression. There's only a few of them. He recreates the Rebirth cover in a double scene where we see it from one perspective, and then we see it from like Perpetua's perspective. There's also a death scene in here, I think, that's done really well. But those are really the only two where he got to do something really cool. Most of the rest of it is just consumed by a very convoluted story. So first, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think Snyder did really well. Then we're going to talk about some stuff that I thought he did okay, but there were issues with. And then we'll end up with the stuff I really didn't like. And there's a few of those. There's more good than bad in this comic book, for sure. So the first thing that he did really well, I do think he sets up this new world, this hell on earth that has occurred pretty well. We do know that Perpetua is the new big bad. She has destroyed Earth 22 kind of when we get here. There are only 8 Earths remaining in the multiverse. It's very similar to kind of what the Illuminati were doing during Incursion, during the Marvel event Infinity. And it always felt like those guys were bad guys there too, because they were killing off like trillions of people every single issue. So I definitely feel like that's been confirmed, as we're seeing something very similar, as Perpetua is essentially doing what the Illuminati were doing during the Incursions, killing off planets. And she has given the Earth, Earth Prime, to the Batman Who Laughs, and he's divided. It's like a mega continent that looks like the bat symbol, but it's kind of distorted. He's divided it into Castle Bat, which is the stronghold of the Batman Who Laughs, the Arkham Wastelands, which are controlled by Harley and Dr. Arkham, Megapocalypse, which is controlled by Mr. Miracle, and Darkfather, which is like the Batman Dark Side mashup. He's actually one of the cooler looking characters in here. Then we also have the Hellscape, which includes Themyscira, which is now Hell on Earth, and that is ruled over by our Wonder Woman and Batmage, another like a sorcerer version of Batman. And beside Wonder Woman is the Swamp Thing, and he is on death's door. He does not look good at all. Apparently, the Batman Who Laughs, in order to punish Diana, will go and burn down, forestry and stuff like that to hurt Swamp Thing even more and just kind of wilt him away and keep control over her. And he does that a lot. Whenever he needs control of Wonder Woman, he says he's going to hurt her friends. If he needs her to do something and she kind of resists, he's going to hurt her friends. So we kind of get a good feeling of what this new world that's being presided over by the Batman Who Laughs is, while Perpetua is out there destroying universes. The other thing that I think is done pretty darn well, the current status of Batman and Wonder Woman is fleshed out pretty well. Batman is kind of out there in the shadows making plans, but the problem is anything that he decides he's going to do, any of his strategies, they can't work because the Batman Who Laughs can predict everything that he's going to do. So he's trying to do kind of like all this asymmetric warfare, looking for small victories. But it's not going to work because the Batman Who Laughs is going to always be a step ahead of him, because he's going to know kind of what he's doing. And Batman really wants to be the main strategist. Whereas Wonder Woman kind of can see that can't happen. She knows that the Batman Who Laughs isn't going to let it happen. And she's kind of making her own plans as she's holding down the fort on Earth and Themyscira, which is now Hell on Earth, protecting the people. And she's also imprisoning a bunch of characters for the Batman Who Laughs. But it turns out Wonder Woman, because Batman is essentially useless, because the Batman Who Laughs knows what he's going to do, is really the key to fixing everything. Superman is shown in one little bitty panel, but he's essentially off screen. This does feel like something Superman should be a part of, but if he was here, he would probably solve everything. So I can see why they have him off somewhere else. We're not really sure what he's doing, because the one time we do see him, I'm quite certain that's not actually our Superman. That feels like a Superman from another multiverse. So the thing that I think that's done the best, and my favorite part without a doubt in this comic book, and this is a huge spoiler, it's something that I wasn't expecting, but I was very happy, was the death of the Batman Who Laughs. Easily the best page of art by Greg Capullo, just looks gorgeous. But it also really reinforces that Wonder Woman is the wild card, because he thought, he knew what she was going to do, because, he knew how she was going to use the metal from the invisible jet to make a shield. That's not what she did. She used it to make an invisible chainsaw and destroy the Batman Who Laughs, which is awesome. Love this scene. Best part of the comic. completely unexpected. Definitely shows that Snyder is not pulling any punches. There are no sacred cows in Dark Knight's death metal. He killed off the standout character, from Dark Knight's metal that has been a huge seller. So that was a huge love this moment within this story. I hate the Batman Who Laughs. He feels like a character that's something like if you had a bunch of fifth graders at like DC Comics sitting at a lunchroom table, they would think of the Batman Who Laughs. It would be like, you know what would be cool? A Batman that's actually the Joker. That would be awesome, dude. And that feels like what the Batman Who Laughs has been this entire time, which is cool if it was Elseworlds or if it was just like a side character or something. But he had become the focal point of the DCU. He really ruined everything that was working about DC Comics. So I am so happy the character is gone. There's some cool homages in here. There's like I said, there's a reference to the 9th level of hell. Obviously, that's a reference to Dante's Inferno, classic piece of literature. There's also talk when they go to the pit, it's called the Tartarus. That is like a dungeon of torment in Greek mythology. It was also recently used in the Tinian's Batman. There was the Tartarus house where the designer brought in all the villains and everything, and it turned out that the designer was the one that was going to be tormented as the Joker kind of turned the tables on him. They also, I saw a reference to Tartarus in another story recently. It feels like maybe all these guys all went and read like the same mythology leading into these stories, which I think is kind of weird. But it is cool that they kind of made a cool reference to Greek mythology. There's also an homage to Lord of the Rings, or at least I think it is. Batman here has a Black Lantern ring, so I guess he's a Black Lantern, and he uses it, and he brings up a bunch of soldiers that died during the Revolutionary War protecting Gotham. And it doesn't remind you of the way that the Black Lantern ring was used in Blackest Night, but it is exceptionally reminiscent of a scene from Return of the King, where finally at the end, the army of the undead is risen and essentially turns the tide of the war. And there's also a map at the very beginning that laying out the new Earth that Batman Who Laughs has that feels very Tolkien-esque. Although I guess it could also be a reference to Game of Thrones. But I thought all that was very cool. But the problem with this is, this scene when Batman is resurrecting an army of the dead, it feels like it was important. You see this, you're like, oh, cool. The army of the dead's about to fight all the Dark Knights for the Batman Who Laughs. There's a page or two, but you don't know what happens. There's no repercussions from this. What's the fallout? This feels like a big battle. But next thing you know, a couple pages later, there's Diana who was there. She's went back to Themyscira, is ruling as her underworld. Batman Who Laughs shows up in another panel. Nothing's happened with him. Batman goes to another place. So he raised this army of undead to fight. Who won? Are they all gone? It feels like maybe they were, but it felt like this should have been really cool, but it really wasn't. So it was a cool homage, and it felt like they just kind of used it to do something neat, but they didn't really finish it off. At least that's the way I took it. Another thing that I kind of like but don't like at all is Wally West in here. He's essentially taken prisoner at the beginning, but he has Dr. Manhattan's powers now. So the good part is he does inform Wonder Woman how to fix the multiverse, and we're going to get into that here in a minute. But he is not powerful at all in here, And he also mentions that if he could erase what he's done, he would. Is this a reference to Heroes in Crisis, or is this another catastrophe he's created since the end of Flash Forward and in this story? What the hell is he talking about? Like I said, he's supposed to be on the Mobius tree. He's supposed to be one of the most powerful characters in the universe. And in here, we do learn that he's powered by the connective energy that binds the multiverse, which is apparently represented by the color blue. But I guess as the connective energy fades, as the multiverses are destroyed, his power fades with it. So I guess that is why Wally's power is fading. And obviously Wally's connective energy ends up representing the past, reminding us that we're all part of one epic generational story, which I guess represents the multiverse and what we know of the multiverse that is being kind of destroyed by all these crises. Now let's get kind of to the stuff I really didn't like and I thought didn't work at all. And this is absolutely the worst page in this comic book. I hate this page. Not even Greg Capullo can save this convoluted mess. Look at this. Just look at all this dialogue. It's awful. It's terrible. And this is kind of where we learn about the other power. There's two powers. There's a connective energy, and then there's a crisis energy. And crisis energy represents selfishness and greed and predation. And crisis energy is what powers Perpetua, the new big bad. And we learn, and I absolutely hate this. This is the worst part of the comic book. Even worse than this page is what we learn on it, is that Perpetua has created all the crisis while trapped behind the source wall in the DC Comics universe. Even though it was recently established in Jeff Johns' Doomsday Clock that Dr. Manhattan had been doing that because he was tinkering with the DC multiverse, and every time he would make a change, there would be a crisis. And he was the one that was creating this. But now that has all been retconned, even though Doomsday Clock just ended like, what, 6 months ago? It's all been retconned where he was trying to fix all the stuff that Perpetua was doing. That certainly does not fit in line with the story that we just read in Doomsday Clock. That doesn't make sense at all. It's retconning while that story is still fresh. I really think Snyder probably should have worked harder to meld those things together, because he's basically just making a story that we all waited for like, I don't know, 2 years to finish, completely impotent and worthless. And I absolutely hate that. This is absolutely the worst thing about this story. And one of the things that it's just, like I said, the story itself is a convoluted mess, even though it's a fun read. That's the best way I can describe it. So within this, we also learn, kind of Wally tells Wonder Woman that in order to destroy Perpetua, they need to save the worlds in the dark multiverse. They need to go into the dark multiverse and save them, similar to what he was doing in Flash Forward, because it turns out the Quintessence gave Wonder Woman and the Justice League the power to fight Perpetua, because trapped within the dark multiverse are all these beings that are powering Perpetua. And as long as the people in the multiverse remember that the crisis existed, they will continue to empower her, because apparently she's Dark Tinkerbell. If you believe in the crisis that happened, or you have a memory of them, that's what powers Perpetua. And that's why all these characters are imprisoned within Themyscira, I guess. What a lame payoff. Like, the Dark Tinkerbell of the DC Comics universe. I don't know. I didn't like Perpetua to begin with. Now that I know this information, I certainly dislike the character even more. Like, did DC Comics not have enough villains with godlike powers already? We already had Darkseid, Doomsday, Anti-Monitor, Trigon, Parallax, Necron, Superboy Prime, Leviathan, Grail, Ares. Like, the list goes on and on. But now it turns out Perpetua was the queen of all these all along. And obviously that brought in, Barbados within Dark Knight's Metal, which was her, minion or something like that. And obviously Superboy Prime and Anti-Monitor are now underneath her and are subservient to her. And we're going to get something called the Robin King, which apparently Snyder says is the scariest character he's ever created. I certainly doubt that, but yeah. Perpetua is Dark Tinkerbell. There you go, folks. You heard it here first. And pretty, I don't know, not very exciting to me. There's certainly more good than bad in this comic, but this is not a classic comic book issue. I'm seeing some people be like, oh, this is amazing. This is awesome. Yeah, it's all right. Like, it's cool. The images are good. The art's really good. There's some cool fight scenes, and there's some neat stuff to look at. But this is not classic storytelling, people. Trust me. The good things about this, obviously, Bruce and Diana were fleshed out really well. We got a good introduction to the new status quo on Earth. And we do know what she needs to do, or what they need to do to save the multiverse from Perpetua. And if you leave your brain at the door and you enjoy the art and the characters chewing up the scenery, it is fun. So, there is that. This is a fun comic to read. But we certainly need to learn more about Wally, and we know that he's been depowered because he's losing the connective power, or whatever stupid thing that Scott Snyder just made up. But what the hell was he talking about? All the stuff he could undo? Was he talking about Heroes in Crisis? Was he talking about other things that he'd done? Obviously, the best thing about this comic book is the Batman Who Laughs is finally dead. But we're not sure where this is going, because there is a new version of Batman Who Laughs. There was a button that got pushed when he died that basically brought back a new version of the Batman Who Laughs, but a new version of Batman that's apparently Dr. Manhattan Batman. So I guess this could technically be worse. you know, if this character lasts on past this event. But we'll have to see where they go with that story. I do feel like, whereas I do like this issue, this definitely feels like a story that is absolutely going to collapse under years of convoluted storytelling. I don't see how Scott Snyder cannot do that. That is one of the big issues with Scott Snyder's writing where while he does create fun stories, and when he's doing smaller things, smaller stories, they're a lot of fun to read. When he starts doing these big epic events, he goes a little too big, a little too hard in the paint. He makes them far too convoluted. 10 millennia ago, Perpetua was, you know, and God, it's so complex and stupid, and they all end up collapsing under the weight of him trying to create the most epic story in DC Comics history. This will definitely happen here. And the worst thing about this, obviously, is Perpetua. She's a lame, unnecessary villain. I do recommend this comic book, even though there are some things I dislike or even some things I strongly dislike. I think people will enjoy this. If you're a DC Comics fan, you need to be reading this because this is going to consume the DC Comics universe, you know, until 2021 at least. And who knows, if people really love it, maybe they'll keep expanding it, you know. It is, it'll, you know, it's like Perpetua eating up all the multiverses. Scott Snyder's death metal will end up eating up the entire DCU. And maybe it'll just, there won't be a DC Comics anymore. There'll be a death metal comics moving forward. Who knows? Probably not, but it could happen, I guess. So if you like DC Comics, definitely read this. There's a lot of good stuff. It's fun. Just leave your brain at the door. Don't think about it. Enjoy this story, and I think you will enjoy Dark Knight's Death Metal #1. And that will do my review here on Thinking Critical YouTube.